Great, thank you, Justin. Appreciate the introductions. We'll jump right into the panel discussion. I'm excited to have this group here to cover this important topic. We'll go around and maybe have each person answer one question quickly, just to get sort of a temperature check of how people come to this topic. The question is, does creating a future-ready workforce excite you or intimidate you? How do you feel about it? Paul, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Eric. It's an excellent question and a great way to start off the session. So thank you very much for that. I think excited is the right word. Not because I was born excited and I'm just full of that sort of non-stop get up and go and effervescence that around HSBC I've come to be recognized for across the service centers that we manage. I think it presents us with an enormous challenge, which is not a challenge to be frightened of or apprehensive of. It's a challenge to be excited about. We've got an enormous opportunity to be able to upskill people. And we're taking that extremely seriously. The one challenge, though, and the one thing that I think we all have to be continually aware of is that we can't run this on a programmatic basis. It's about mindset. It's about making sure that people have the right attitude to want to be upskilled, to be part of the future workforce. Without that mindset, those of us on this call, those of us joining the wider session, are setting ourselves up to fail. It's not education, it's not reskilling for the sake of reskilling, it's reskilling for the future, and that requires us to change the way that we think about things.
Great. Christian, excited or concerned?
I love the question, Eric, and very similar to Paul, very excited. And I guess here's the reason, and I would like to reflect on Commonwealth Bank's strategy. We have this one-liner which talks about build tomorrow's bank today for our customers. And one of our key priorities, which we take very seriously, in particular in enterprise services, is to build global best digital experience and technology. And in order to enable us to do that, we need talent. And we have a great technology and operations talent in Australia, as we are looking to augment talent through our Global Capability Center. And as you probably know, we started the journey recently. Very excited about that. And the reason why we are doing it, as I said, capability. We want to augment capability via our GCC in India. We want to leverage the fact that we have teams in different time zones and extend our operations windows and clearly help us support us on our innovation and automation journey. So super excited.
Great. And Rajesh, excited or concerned? I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I was just speaking. So I just certainly excited about it, and I'm just adding to what Paul and Christian said, that when you're looking at what's coming in future, we have to be excited about it. But when you look at it from a challenge perspective, I would say that challenge is more exciting in context of what we are going to prepare for our future. So when you look at, it's all about the people aspect. It's about if you can read the future today and you can plan for it better. And especially when it talks about reskilling, when it is talking about the new challenges that COVID has created for us, how we are going to relate to that when we are building our future, and how things are going to relook when we relook at our workplaces. I would say those all elements come in addition to what we are already talking about, building the workforce for future, which could be about new skills, new areas, new workforce, redesigning our, the whole work culture, because this is about redesigning the work, redesigning or redefining the skills, because we are not going to continue with the skills that we had. It could be, very different skills that we are looking forward to. So I would say certainly excited about it, and we are looking forward for this.
Great. So I'm going to actually pick up on something that I think all of you touched on, but Paul was maybe the most explicit about it, that, hey, this isn't about creating the world's leading program. This is about mindset change, being oriented towards the future. Does anybody else want to kind of build on that? What are going to be the hallmarks of sort of getting to the future ready workforce? They're going to be the key success factors. So maybe it's not the learning programs. Is it being continuous learning? Is it painting more clear pictures in a time, more clear pictures of career opportunities in a time of uncertainty? You know, sort of what are maybe the principles that people need to think about as they go after this, which on the surface does kind of appear like maybe a learning challenge, but is I think a lot more than that. Anybody like to go first? All right, Christian, I'm going to call you first.
Go on, Eric. Sorry, I thought you were waiting for one of us. Christian, please.
Look, for me, a big and important point is culture, and just reflecting a bit on Commonwealth Bank of Australia, it's about innovation and growth. And if I think about culture, if I think about innovation and growth, there are a couple of things which come into my mind. Point one, something which we take very seriously, enterprise mindset. We acknowledge the fact that we have a very strong presence in Australia as we are building a presence in India. So having a strong enterprise mindset is important. For me, curiosity to learn is something which is super relevant and important. And we'd love to learn in Australia from best practice, international best practice in India. And we encourage our teams in Australia and in India to really join this journey of continuous learning, and then ultimately to build the skill set which we need for our franchise. There is one additional point I would like to mention in this regard, which is something which reminds me of some previous work I did in India, not for CBA, but for Deutsche Bank, which is like a startup mentality. As we are setting up a GCC in India, I think there is something which is exciting because we can create this kind of startup mentality, which does attract talent and which really helps us to evolve as an organization.
Paul, would you like to add your further thoughts?
No, absolutely. Thank you. I think Rajesh mentioned what for me underpins quite a lot. What got us to where we are today is not what we need for the future. And I think we've all recognized that the life of the BPO, the KPO, the capability center, whichever name we use in whichever organization, we were known for and we were recognized for offshoring for the purposes of cost arbitrage. There's no getting away from that. That's what formed the industry. We're now recognized for being able to undertake tasks at a greater volume, for a greater value, and the ability to change more and adapt faster on a much greater scale, which those that we provide services to fundamentally can't do because they're fractured by nature that they're in the markets that we support. So for me, it's about adaptability. It's about making sure that we create a culture that our colleagues recognize that they have to adapt to enable us to adapt. And once we've created that adaptability mindset, we're then, certainly in HSBC, looking at new tools and technologies that we allow our colleagues to adapt, to undertake their continuous learning, to make themselves fit for the future. And I think those pieces, if you fit them all together, that's what creates that journey of continuous learning. But you have to adapt both as an organization. But as I mentioned earlier, the mindset, that adaptability of the individual to want to learn, underpinned by the recognition that what we got, where we are today, is not where we need to be in the future. So everything that we needed to learn over the last 25 years of the journeys that we've had is not relevant necessarily for the future. It's not what we'll build on it, but it's not necessarily the same skill sets.
Do you have any early thoughts or experiences on kind of what helps create that change and being more adaptable? I mean, the industry in some ways based upon reliable service, and sort of very trying to create predictability out of things, taking variance out. In some ways, that kind of seems to fly in the face of, hey, let's now be adaptable.
Doesn't it just? Absolutely, which is why I think it's one of the biggest challenges and why I think it's the mindset change that we actually need. And again, Rajesh mentioned COVID, and I'm trying so much in conversation nowadays not to fall back on COVID, but COVID in this case has been a fantastic enabler. We in HSBC, we're 55,000 people globally in our service centers. And we moved more or less overnight on anywhere between the 10th and the 22nd of March last year, about 55,000 people to move to work from home with nearly no blip whatsoever. But what we recognized in almost immediately was that moving the people home so that they were safe and they could continue to provide the services that we were recognized for being able to provide wasn't actually the biggest challenge. It was, how do we continue to keep those people engaged? How do we continue to educate them? How do we continue to make sure that they are on that learning journey? So what we found, in answer to your question, is that the new technologies are the things that we're having to introduce. They're the things that we're learning as an organization we have to enable. Otherwise, quite frankly, we lose our population on that journey because they're all still sitting at home for the largest part. And unless we join them on that journey, we can't simply say, you're now at home, continue to learn. It doesn't work like that. So we've had to really upskill ourselves and change our capabilities as an organization. And to that point, we've now got 75,000 staff on individual learning, so individual learning journeys that they've chosen to do. Obviously, that's a number of people on a couple of journeys, but they're all doing it remotely. They're all doing it via apps or via their PC at home, something that they would never have done before last March. So I think that's, in answer to your question, it's that adaptability in the organization. That's the biggest learn that we've had.
I agree with that. Hey, Eric, can I quickly reflect on what Paul said, because that resonates a lot with me. Okay.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
So totally acknowledge what you said, Paul. Just maybe another incremental angle to the COVID situation. As a matter of fact, we have onboarded everyone since we started our journey in CVA India virtually. Completely different experience, done greatly by the team in India. And back to my point of continuous learning, I think for us in Australia, there's so much to learn from this experience in India that I think this kind of mutual learning, mutual understanding is something which is key for us on our DCC journey.
Yeah, the COVID has been an interesting accelerant in a lot of ways. I think we initially spoke about how it accelerated the digital transformation, sort of get to the cloud. I think in some other ways, maybe it's actually accelerated the human part of the digital transformation as well. Let me go to the next topic and pick up on something, Rajesh, you mentioned in your opening comments that, hey, the skills that we need in the going forward are not the same skills. And one of the things when people are talking about the future ready workforce, they often talk about, hey, we need to understand the gap. What is this, where we're trying to get from to? Do you think that's important? And if so, what sort of gaps are we looking at? Are these technical skills? Are these mindset skills, leadership skills? Sort of how do you think about laying out that sort of the from to picture?
Thanks, Eric. And I was about to, just itching to just intervene when Paul was referring to, and just, and you bang on asked about the technology gap, or in terms of skills, what is the impact of it? So if I just put a context to the way the technology enhancement has happened and the skill gap that has been created, and this is, I would say, the time will never come like this where we have to manage the skill gap more than forever, whatever situation that we have seen or what we potentially will be seeing, because this is the time when the skill gap is at the most. And if we don't manage it the right way, potentially, at least in Indian context, the amount of, let's say the impact of it in terms of revenue for an Indian context would be in excess of $2 trillion. This is the gap that it can impact. Look at it, and this is basis of really going to, extrapolate into if we don't do it the right way today. So that is one way to look at it from the impact of it. Second is what is that is changing, and what is that, the things have changed. So obviously the type of jobs have changed, the type of roles is going to change. So like you just talked about the technical mindset or the leadership mindset, or the other aspects of it. When you look at it from a people perspective, now the world has changed with people working from home. A lot of decision making is going to go flatter. That means you are going to create first the leadership skill at all levels. So it is no more going to be that you have to wait for going to the top to take a decision. And especially in a GCC's construct, this becomes even more imperative. It's becomes even more important for us that we have to start looking at that. And second is when you're looking at the type of skills, what it is happening is now the type of skill is going to have furthermore change, where we are working on trust-based. Because when you work from home, where you are not being monitored 24/7, where things are very different, it's largely trust-based. That means you're going to be far more digitally, monitored. And this is where the AI plus human part comes in picture. where you have to be future ready in that aspect. So that means people are just not going to be monoskilled. Monoskilled is a past, the word of future, past. The what is future is multi-skilled. And multi-skilled, when we say earlier, we were talking about the whole population to learn digital, to learn cloud. But what we are saying is that was being seen as being competitive. But as we go forward, this will become a need, because this is how the technology landscape is changing, how the new work expectation is changing. So this is where I would say we have to emphasize. And then how do we keep our workforce ready? So this is the most important part, that you can't just change the workforce. You have to redeploy the workforce with the new skills. So how are you going to create personalized training, especially when people are virtual? People are, partially virtual, partially online, partially offline. So this is where the personalized learning, the omni-channel approach of teaching, and how are you going to make it gamified? Because that is where, you can create some level of, push or pull, in terms of learning and creating that learning material. So these are various aspects that we will have to be prepared with. And this is where I would say that we have to start looking. So one is about the type of jobs, the type of roles, and at different levels, the leadership skill has to be developed so that they can take decisions. And this is where I would say the future will lie.
Anybody want to add on anything that they would refute or amplify beyond what Rajesh just described?
I think all points that Rajesh has made are absolutely key. I think one of the things that we learned as an organization, which for us has been important, is where we were when we had everyone in the office. We were focusing on that digital, that cloud, that aspect of continuous learning. The last 18 months have taught us, not that we'd neglected, but we needed to re-emphasize or enable people to top up their ability to learn about leadership. Leadership in the virtual world, be it, as we have been for the last 18 months, 5 days a week, or when we get to the future, a hybrid model of 3 or 2 days a week of seeing each other. We built our capability centers around seeing each other, and our people, managers and leaders leading on that basis. That was an area where we noticed people didn't necessarily struggle, but needed a helping hand. So those leadership skills, those softer skills, is something that we added quite quickly to our curriculum, and we've made sure that we've kept our curriculum as agile as our workforce now need to be, depending on where that hybrid model that we actually land on. So I think that's a key element that as an organization we recognized early, and to the earlier point, we've adapted to.
I think a lot of the things that we may have spoken about as being maybe apprenticeship skills, things you get experience, and the experience will help you. Because now things are virtualized, in some ways people aren't around it to gain the experience. You have to become a lot more intentional on how you create those things. Both maybe have different sort of means about different things, but also how some of these learning programs and development opportunities may be curated for the group. Okay, so we've talked about this kind of from the perspective of the leaders and sort of how we see the architecture of the change that's unfolding. If we put ourselves in the mindsets or in the shoes of the managers, those who used to be able to see their team easily and kind of walk around the office, now that's not so easy. People are maybe managing multiple teams. What is it that we think the managers will need to be doing differently? How will they need to be taking their skills up? How are they going to have to prepare for the future in a different way? Both in some ways, this COVID virtual that we've been talking about, but when you combine that with this accelerated change due to the further digitization of operations. Anybody want to take a first swing at that?
Happy to jump first. Look, I mean, we already discussed it slightly. Couple of pieces which are relevant for us from a Commonwealth Bank of Australia perspective. One is, I would say, people first organization, continuous learning. We are on a tremendous learning path. We just started our DCC play in India. We encourage our teams in Australia and in India to work together on our digital journey. And the output so far has been tremendous, has been incredibly exciting for both parties, by the way, for us in Australia as for our colleagues in India, point one. Point two, back back to what I said earlier, I think there are some best practice which we are seeing in India, which we can easily adapt in Australia. The entire collaboration as part of the COVID situation, which was very challenging for our colleagues in Bangalore. We had so much of learnings which we adapted on the ground in Australia, which was fantastic, which was really great. So really, what I'm trying to say is really this kind of continuous learning, understanding people's first, mutual understanding culturally as well as skill-wise, what we can learn from each other is something that is incredibly exciting. And I've been multiple sessions with our teams in India. I see this excitement. And that's part of the reason why our employees stick to CBA, why they like working for us and why they like to jointly achieve joint targets.
You mentioned that the teams in Australia are learning from the teams in India. Can you be just a little bit more specific on that? Is it like how to schedule work? Is it technology work models? Kind of what are some of those things where you're seeing that learning happen?
I think it's both. It's the way how we collaborate, but there are certain areas where we have a bit of a lack in terms of expertise, right? Back to the conversation we had on gaps. If I think about financial crime operations, if I think about certain pieces which we are doing in data analytics, very clearly we have pockets of talent in India. And I see our Australian colleagues very much enjoying the conversation with our teams in the GCC in India to mutually learn, mutually work on certain programs to help us on the strategic journey I alluded to earlier.
Paul, anything you would add on implications for managers and how you would advise them to think about their role as it changes?
Yeah, Lee, I mean, so a couple of points that we've been instilling with our teams is that in the current environment and the future, that sort of hybrid work model that we're all talking about, it's no longer good enough to be a manager. It's now about being a leader. And when we could sit and see each other, there was a lot of managerial aspects to people's roles. Now we need leaders. And I think that's a key element. That not that our people were unaware of that, but it was about management. Now it's about leadership. And it sort of takes me back to that age-old adage that we all heard at school. You know, there's never a stupid question. Make sure you put your hand up and ask. And if you're asking it, someone else is wanting the answer as well. And we're encouraging people to ask. I mean, as I mentioned, the HSBC service centres, we're 55,000 people strong. HSBC is 220,000 people globally. Someone somewhere is going to know the answer to whatever's worrying you as a leader and how to cope. So we're creating not only that continuous learning journey, but also a wider infrastructure on how to help you as an individual with what you may be challenged as, not just from not just from an education and a learning perspective, but also as a leader. And I think that ecosystem is also equally important. So just ask is something that we've been instilling across our people, and it's working. I mean, we've noticed we've got more leaders than managers now, which is a wonderful problem to have. It's like a football manager that, you know, three strikers rather than one, and I don't know which one to choose for which game. It's a wonderful position to be in.
So you've drawn a distinction between management and leadership. Have you defined that within the organization of kind of what do you consider to be management versus what are leadership attributes?
So we've spoken about the attributes, yes, but if it were a Venn diagram, there's a nice blurred bit in the middle. We're a financial services institution. As soon as we parameterize too much, we find ourselves putting KPIs on it, and then people act to KPI rather than act. I mean, leadership isn't about hitting targets. That's management. Leadership is about taking people on a journey. And you can't necessarily put KPIs around that. So we haven't gone quite that far. But yes, our learning tools are now making that distinction and helping people navigate the difference between the two, and obviously the environment in which we now find ourselves.
Josh, I got the sense.
I just wanted to add here, and I will not try to repeat what we just heard from Paul and Christian, but looking at it from the real eye when we deal with managers, I think clearly, like Paul said, it's clearly no more management, it's about leadership. And one big trait which has to be, either acquired or taught is about how best you can pass on your enable or empower your next level to take decisions. Because this is one of the biggest challenge that we have seen, given that in an organization, depending on the size, if all are sitting on the same floor, we typically huddle and take a decision. But in this case, that's obviously not an option at most times, and in future as well, where you are going to be either hybrid workforce model or I don't anticipate everybody coming back to office, at least in near future. It would be a concept of either hybrid or something very different that we will learn in future. But clearly that is where the leadership skill part of the empowerment comes in picture. And second part which comes in picture is also to understand for each, let's say the manager / leader, is to how to deal with their subordinates or their teams. So this is the collaboration part. So earlier it was about a technical person being a techie as techie manager, or somebody who was focusing on other area. Now that multi-skill part on the behavioral side comes in picture. So this is where the manager also has to start looking at the behavioral aspect of it, because it's no more managing the person in the front, it is also managing the person at the back, anticipating what is coming, and to the point that what questions are being asked or what situations are being arised, how are you preparing yourself in advance. And the third part is about the cultural thing, because this was one aspect where we typically have not emphasized beyond a point from a work culture that we have created. But now when people are away from you, at times when people are depending on which location of India or which location of the world that they are sitting out of, what the whether they are the speaker is on when they're talking to you and what is happening, there's a new learning that how are you going to moderate your discussions, how are you going to tone your discussion. This is a new soft skill that needs to come in picture. So there are various of these factors which obviously will define a new manager as we go forward. And obviously the person has to be technically skilled, because it is no more about delegating it from a skill perspective. And given the time zones and the timelines and people availability, everybody has to become now a technically skilled and technical savvy guy. So it's no more an option, it is a need.
Yeah, and you're right. The types of communications and the ways to optimize them have really exploded, and there's a lot of nuance that I think is maybe obvious as you think about it, but it maybe wasn't obvious in the first in the early days of the reshuffling. So okay. So we've talked a little bit now about managers and what how their job is different, and all of this at the end of the day is to help the employees themselves, those on the front line, be able to contribute at a higher level, be doing sort of different things. We've talked about new jobs, new roles. If you were to give them advice, how might they need to think about what all this means for them? They may have heard stories from others on, hey, here's how my career evolved. How might careers now evolve, or how are the expectations changing, and are the keys to advancing yourself going to also change, and how should they then think about planning?
I think it's a fantastic opportunity. And again, back to my earlier comment, I think, and I can just talk for CBA. There is a bit of an angle of startup mentality we have in India, whilst obviously Australian largest bank is backing that. There's opportunity because there is high demand from us in Australia to learn to a certain extent from best practice on the ground in India. And secondly, as this GCC is a growing organization, there is tremendous opportunity to learn and to develop. And I think this is something which really excites our employees, and something which we foster as part of our training programs, as part of our communication, and quite frankly, as part of our DNA as CBA. We want our employees to learn, we want them to grow, we want them to experience, and to be in a situation as we speak right now, where we grow our GCC, where we work together between Australia and India. I think that's an exciting time.
Eric, I think it's the employee of today is facing a challenge that we didn't face, and to my esteemed colleagues on this panel, I'm casting us all with a similar age brush, although I'm pretty sure I probably outstrip a number of you when it comes to age. We joined an organization where roles and jobs evolved, and there was learning on the job. You don't necessarily hear that term anymore, as much. It's still there. In the future, I think it's going to be a lot less. I think what we do in our capability centers is about to feel a revolution rather than an evolution. And our employees have to recognize that that's coming. They don't have the luxury, I think, of the way we grew up through the organization. They're going to have to stay one step ahead of what is coming. And it's our responsibility to help them stay one step ahead. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I would never have been able to talk to you about cloud, AI, machine learning. It wasn't relevant. I recognize that our organization, our industry is moving much more in that direction and will rely upon, and they will be required future skills to understand cloud, AI, etc. So I've taken the responsibility to educate myself. And that's the kind of thing that our colleagues and those joining our organizations now have to recognize, that we didn't necessarily have to. There is a need to continually learn. And in HSBC, we've now introduced a future skills program. We've at university with more collateral on this topic than one can shake a proverbial stick at. And it's key that people understand that it is now their responsibility, and they have to take a personal responsibility, because quite frankly, they're not going to be able to leverage the opportunities of the future. Industry is moving. And I think that's a key difference, and that's a message. It's a message that we keep instilling. If you're not ready, then you're not necessarily going to be relevant. And that's rather a harsh message to deliver, that none of us actually had to try and consume when we started X number of years ago.
Yes, it has changed. Josh?
Yeah, so I'll just add on to a few important aspects in terms of the behavior side of it, because already, Paul and Christian mentioned about what is expected, from employees. But when you look at it in the current context, one thing that employees today, at least in last 2 years who have joined us, have missed out, and clearly Paul mentioned, is about, one is on-job learning is no more a statement. Second is the learning from the peer and learning from leadership, which is called, it's like you just sit with the leader, you start watching the leader in the floor, and you start behaving and learning from that. That aspect is totally gone because we are all virtual. So that learning is a big miss, for the current employees. So that is one. The second is, when you look at it, the skill gap is clearly one that people have to be current with the current skills, with all the future skills. This is a very clear need. But what is also important is from the mindset perspective, that today, with especially in GCCs in context, with number of GCCs being set up, that opportunities that has flourished and the number of opportunities that has come in. One very important advice from my side would be to look at going through the complete cycle wherever you are, because today what is happening is people are more interview ready than job ready, and this is becoming a new mindset, that I want to be selected through this interview process because there could be a better pay scale or better type of work, versus trying to understand that what you will learn from the cycle of the job when you complete it. And this typically takes, in the new world, maybe 6 months to 12 months, at times 18 months to 24 months. And I would advise at least 24 months is a good time for anyone to go through a full cycle of understanding, going through the journey, learning ups and downs, and then taking a call to, how do you want to, create your future. But this is one part that we are seeing is slowly going down, because people are sitting away. They are not being, coached over a tea or a coffee. And these virtual connects, whatever we do, are still not giving that impact. And that is one aspect where employees really need to relook at it. That how will they, prepare themselves to be ready to stay put at a place for a longer time, go through the cycle and learn these things, because this is what will prepare them for future. Today, if we sit together and we say that we have learned in the last 5 years, we have also got, educated ourselves, whether the cloud or the AI, is because we have been with some of these places where we have stuck around for a few years and understood the change. And this is very important for the future employees, that they have to start thinking about it versus just being interview ready.
Excellent. So with that, I think I'm taking a couple of things away from this that we've covered in multiple ways. One is we're in sort of the midst of a major mindset change, and that's sort of for everyone in terms of how we're going to manage and lead organizations, what's required in terms of new roles, et cetera. The second thing that we've touched on a couple ways is that because things have virtualized, a little bit more flat, there's an accelerated pace of change, the need for leadership is greater, and that cuts deeper in the organization and more broadly. So there's a lot of opportunity from that, but it's again an example of some of the mindset change. And I think the final thing that we've touched on a number of ways is that learning is something that is going to keep happening. It's just part of the journey. We're doing this together. If you're like learning in front of someone, that's not a bad thing. That's expected. We ought to be sharing. We ought to be interacting with each other. It's not embarrassing to have to learn something. If you're not, that's a problem. So it's sort of endemic to it. It's part of collaboration and doing this together. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up the panel. Thanks to all of you for sharing your perspectives and your journeys, and I look forward to catching up with you again in the future. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.